Starting today, I'll be living with my parents. If you don't like it, you can just divorce me and leave." George stood boldly in front of me, a provocative smile playing on his face. "If that's the case, you're fired. Get out of the company." I told George, my heart's content laid bare. With a small sigh and a chilly gaze, I glared at George. Feeling my stare, George's body suddenly stiffened. Anxiety was evident on his face. "I, Sandra Hansen, am 44 years old. I run a company that manufactures transportation equipment and its parts. Founded by my grandfather, I am the third-generation president. Originally, I had no intention of taking over this family-run business. I wasn't particularly good at school and wanted a normal job, but I ended up working in an IT company. However, when I was 26, my parents died suddenly in an accident. I had a brother who loved research and was deep into his graduate studies. My father had named me as the next president in his will. After that, my life was like a roller coaster. I quit my job and started working at my father's company. The vice president acted as president, and I had to relearn everything from scratch. I worked tirelessly, sparing little time for sleep, and fervently learned about the company's products and management. At first, many treated me cautiously, but gradually they warmed up to me. I found enjoyment in my work and became president at the age of 40. I immersed myself in my job, putting the company first in my life. As my colleagues married off, I still had no partner. I always prioritized work over fun. For the company, I traveled domestically and internationally, so busy that I barely remember Christmas. Relatives began to press me about succession issues. Every time we met at family gatherings, they made inconsiderate comments like, "You better hurry up or you won't be able to have kids." Some people asked, "Aren't you lonely?" but their concern only led to more nagging. I responded with a wry smile and quickly left the situation. My dedication to the company paid off, and business was booming. Embracing IT technology was a key to success. As things eased, I finally had some leisure time. That's when I met George at a bowling alley. I started bowling on a light recommendation from a business associate, and it suited my personality. Now I have my own bowling ball and shoes and even participate in tournaments. George was a regular at the bowling alley. He was an engaging conversationalist, taught me many things I didn't know, and we even competed in pairs tournaments. After several meals together, he confessed his feelings, and we started a relationship. George is the same age as me but looks so young he's often mistaken for someone in his 20s. People sometimes mistake me for his older sister. Do I look that unreliable? He would blush with embarrassment whenever it happened. George has many hobbies. He doesn't just watch sports like baseball, soccer, and golf, he actively participates in them. Influenced by him, I started golfing too. Not just sports, he also invites me to concerts and Broadway performances. Through my interactions with George, I've encountered many new worlds and become passionate about them. Time spent with George is always exciting and fun. At 44, having a boyfriend for the first time might be making me a bit giddy. Amidst these fluttery feelings, George made an unexpected proposal. "I want you to meet my parents." I was at a loss for words at his sudden suggestion. "If we're going to get married, I want to introduce you to my parents." It was about 2 months since we officially started dating. It felt it was a bit soon, but I was also aware of my age. I wasn't without apprehension, but I also felt joy. I couldn't think of a reason to refuse. We visited George's parents' home a week later. The house was orderly and filled with a pleasant scent. In the living room, George's father and mother warmly welcomed us. George's mother had an elegant air, her hair dyed a beautiful shade of purple. "How lucky my son is to be dating such a lovely lady," she said, all smiles. "You are truly a wonderful young woman." Blushing from their compliments, I felt a bit embarrassed. George's parents continued to praise me, making my face turn red. George stood beside me, looking proud. "That right, Mama. It's rare to find someone like her at 44 years old," he said with a smile, though I felt a bit uncomfortable with his words. Suddenly, a wave of anxiety washed over me. But George and his parents were laughing happily together. With such wonderful parents, I felt we could build a good relationship after marriage. The earlier anxiety gradually faded. However, hearing George call his parents Mama and Papa made me ponder. I used to call my parents the same when I was young, but is it common for an adult man to do so? It seemed unusual to me. I may be unaware of common societal norms myself. Having lost my parents early and devoted myself to my work, I realize I lack common social knowledge. The discomfort I felt towards George may be due to my own deviation from common sense, and I tried not to dwell on it. George likely has a good relationship with his parents. He often praises his mother, which is not a bad thing. However, when we were talking about cooking, George made a slightly awkward comment. "Mama's meat and potatoes is the best in the world." Furthermore, he lightly criticized the meat and potatoes I made. "Yours is a bit." I couldn't keep smiling after hearing those words. This is a good opportunity to ask for the recipe. George's tone was different than usual. Why is he so condescending? Unaware of my confusion, he was laughing happily with his mother. George's mother took out a notebook and started writing down the recipe for meat and potatoes. "Now, you can make it like Mama." I wasn't sure whether to be happy or confused. Before I knew it, my smile had turned ambiguous. It had gotten completely dark outside, and as it was time to leave, the topic of marriage came up. "I want to get married as soon as possible. It'll make life a bit easier, and being a part-timer, the income is tough." His sudden confession left me speechless. "Huh? Pa, part-timer?" I was shocked. George had previously explained that he was working in sales. I hadn't been very detailed about my own job either. I just mentioned that I worked at a manufacturing company. I had kept the fact that I was the president to myself because it was hard to discuss, but I never thought George was a part-timer. As I stood dumbfounded, George snapped back a bit angrily. "You're mocking me because I'm 44, aren't you? There's a reason for this." According to George, his mother had always been frail and often ill. Furthermore, his father had become seriously ill 2 years ago and needed care. At that time, George was working in sales at a printing company but quit to care for his father. Since then, he has been dedicating himself to caregiving as a part-timer. "It's tough for Mama to do caregiving alone, so I really wanted to support my parents." George showed tears as he spoke. I quietly listened to him. "That's why I'm okay with being a part-timer." George glanced at his parents and nodded. "But recently, Papa's condition has been improving, so I'm thinking about getting a job again. I'll do my best when I marry you, Sandra." George sniffled and murmured quietly. I blamed myself for feeling disappointed about him being a part-timer. He had chosen to care for his parents over his career. What a warm and kind person he is. The anxiety and doubts I had felt before were completely gone. A few days later, I made a proposal to George. "Why don't you try applying for a mid-career position at my company?" George was surprised by my sudden proposal. "If you think it's a good idea." I made sure not to pressure him. He seemed a bit hesitant about working at the same company. "Actually, the sales department is short-staffed. It would be helpful if you could join." I carefully chose my words while respecting his pride. It's a different department from mine. But George had other concerns. "If I work, I want to earn properly. I want to reassure Mama." He was still focused on financial issues. Maybe he thought I wasn't earning enough. So I took out a tablet and showed him the job information from my company. I explained the details of the average salary, holidays, paid leave, and benefits. This might actually be good. He looked at the tablet screen intently and seemed a bit more interested. Since the company was planning to expand the sales department, George was hired. When George applied, I quickly informed my secretary about the matter. I might ask my secretary to handle any issues that arise in the future. I also asked my secretary to handle some updates on the website. Once George's hiring was confirmed, we planned to submit our marriage registration immediately. We decided not to have a wedding ceremony. I didn't want my relatives to know, and I wanted to keep the fact that I am the president a secret from George. I expected my in-laws to object, but surprisingly, they agreed smoothly. The only thing George's mother was concerned about was how often we would visit their home. Instead of a wedding, we decided to have a meal at a restaurant and postpone our honeymoon. George himself wasn't very enthusiastic about a honeymoon for some reason. I don't want to be away from Mama and Papa. Again, Mama and Papa. I still felt uncomfortable with his way of speaking. Regarding our new home, a real estate agent recommended a newly built single-family house, but considering George's status, I decided to decline. I thought it was better to avoid unnecessary spending. Ultimately, I decided to start a new life in the apartment I was living in. George agreed to it as well. It was probably because it's close to his parents' house. After we moved in together, I began to notice changes in George's behavior. Suddenly, he started acting as if he looked down on me. Which department do you belong to? George doesn't think of me as a business owner, and while I don't hide that fact, I preferred it to be as little known as possible. In such a situation, George made an unbelievable remark. "Well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to have you quit anyway." I was shocked by his words. Huh, quit. Who is quitting? What in the world is happening? Could it be that not George, but I am the one being asked to quit? A foreboding feeling stirred in my heart. George glanced at me and smirked maliciously. That unfamiliar smile was extremely unpleasant, and I shivered. Suddenly, I felt a chill. "Do you have any complaints?" George looked at me very coldly. My heart began to beat wildly. Holding my chest, I somehow managed to argue that I had no intention of quitting my job. Then, an idea struck me. Perhaps George wants children. "Are you thinking about when we have children? My company has excellent maternity and paternity leave policies." Before I could finish, George said something unbelievable. "I'm not thinking about children. I'm too busy taking care of Mama and Papa." I couldn't grasp the meaning of George's words and tilted my head. At that, George sighed heavily in exasperation. "That's what I said. It's my parents who need care." I was startled by George's sudden shout, but I tried to calm down and respond. "I know about your father's condition. But you said he's been doing better lately. That's why you returned to work, isn't it? Maybe he's okay now, but my parents are old." George showed intense anger. "And you're not worried about that? Such a heartless daughter-in-law." George's voice echoed throughout the room. I was confused and couldn't understand his reasoning. I tried to cool my head and sort out the situation. It seems George is planning to leave the care of his parents to me. Moreover, he seems to be planning to make me quit my job to focus on caregiving. As if his anger had subsided, George smiled slyly. "I'm not saying you should quit right away. It's better if we both work because it increases our income. It seems my income is important for now. From now on, we'll go back to my parents' house on days off. You'll come with me. Every week?" I was willing to help as much as I could, but being forced to provide care every week felt wrong. The most surprising thing was George's changed attitude. Before marriage, he was a cheerful person with many hobbies, always finding joy in anything. He was always a bright and reliable person. I was speechless at how much George had changed. I had just heard from the real estate agent that a new single-family home was being sold right next to his parents' house. Moreover, there were many inquiries about the property, and I had already completed the contract. I had hoped that moving there might change George. But visiting his parents' house was no longer something I looked forward to. However, his parents welcomed me warmly. "Welcome, we have cookies as a souvenir. Please, have some." My father-in-law laughed heartily, squinting his eyes. I feel bad making you come here on your day off." My mother-in-law showed me careful consideration. "No, not at all. Having you visit feels like our own daughter has come home." Seeing my mother-in-law tear up, my emotions surged. I felt I should proceed with the plan for the new house. I could manage with these in-laws. Every time I visited, my mother-in-law prepared my favorite sweets. I am always moved by her thoughtfulness. I dislike following George's orders, but seeing my mother-in-law's happy face soothes my heart. Since getting married, George and I have started visiting his parents' house at separate times. My work schedule made it difficult to visit every weekend. Sometimes I spend weekends in other regions for business trips. As a compensation, I decided to visit his parents' house on weekdays. One day, I headed to his parents' house. Since I had visited many times, I entered through the front door without ringing the intercom. "Excuse me," I said in a soft voice as I headed to the living room. I heard George's voice from the living room. He was supposed to be at work, so I wondered why he was there as I walked down the hallway. Just as I was about to enter the living room, an unsettling conversation reached my ears. I stopped in my tracks and peeked into the living room quietly. "She lacks consideration. She seems to struggle with household chores too," said my mother-in-law in a voice colder than I'd ever heard from her before. Couldn't there have been someone more suitable? It was hard to believe these harsh words were coming from the normally kind woman I knew. Her spiteful tone made my chest hurt and my breathing felt constricted. My hands grew cold, and I felt the blood drain from my face. She used to praise me all the time. To hear such words from my usually gentle mother-in-law, I didn't want to hear any more, yet I couldn't move. George's unpleasantly spoiled voice followed. "Sorry, Mama, but she's pretty sturdy, so she should be good for physical tasks." My resentment towards George deepened at his words. It depends on how she's trained. If educated properly, she can be useful. What does he think I am? I am neither a servant nor a housekeeper. I'm putting up with her now because she contributes financially. I'm looking forward to the future. George and his mother continued their carefree conversation, laughing together. My face went pale with anger. Unable to stand, I leaned against the wall in the hallway for support. The shock from my mother-in-law's words was intense. What had all her previous kindness meant? I remembered my warm mother-in-law, who had baked cookies with me and shared pleasant times. Were all those simply cooking lessons? She was always smiling, sometimes moved to tears. Was all that an act? If so, hesitating to divorce because of my concern for her was pointless. The more I heard of George and his mother's conversation, the more it seemed they only viewed me as a caretaker. My mother-in-law then said something even more significant. "My approach is to keep her happy with compliments for now. That way, she would be pleased," my mother-in-law added. I felt dizzy at this revelation. Her harsh criticism continued relentlessly. "Take a leaf out of my book and manipulate her skillfully. By the way, I heard she's bought a house around here," George said cheerily. I wondered how they knew. There was a call from the real estate agent at home. I was taken aback. The real estate agent had called our home directly. Not specifying my mobile phone for contact was my oversight. "That's great. Now we can use her even more," my mother-in-law said with a vile laugh. Feeling nauseous, I quietly made my way to the entrance and left the house. My hand was numb from gripping my smartphone too hard. On my way home, I messaged George and his mother that I felt unwell. I thought I shouldn't have gotten married if it was going to be like this. The word divorce echoed in my mind. I'm the type to act immediately once I've made up my mind. I always prefer to regret doing something than regret doing nothing. In society, divorces right after marriage might be frowned upon. However, I felt it was far worse to stay with unpleasant people, and that acting sooner was the best course. I couldn't stand life with George any longer. I promptly prepared the divorce papers. I also planned to cancel the contract for the new house. If not handled efficiently, I could lose valuable assets due to property division and compensation issues. However, I was confident there wouldn't be a problem using George's lack of morals to my advantage. I have a reliable lawyer and a trustworthy secretary on my side. After making my decision, I became even more cautious in my actions. Without showing any defiance to George, I continued to feign obedience. According to my secretary, George had been causing multiple problems at the company. This was just the tip of the iceberg. A mere divorce might not completely sever ties with George. After resolving the company issues, I wanted to move forward with the divorce quickly. And I intended to keep my role as president a secret. If George or his parents found out before the divorce, it could lead to complications. Embarrassingly, I had confided all of George's issues to my secretary. With my secretary's help, I was preparing for the divorce. Living with George was suffocating. I felt like I wasn't truly alive. When I happened to meet George at the company one day, he approached me with a broad smile. Perfect timing. He grabbed my hand and pulled me into a nearby meeting room. "Is there something you're hiding from me?" he asked with a sly laugh. Fear coursed through me at his tone. "I heard you bought a house? I got the call that it's ready to move into." I sighed involuntarily. It was the house matter, after all. "Starting today, I'll be living with my parents. If you don't like it, you can just divorce me and leave." I was left dumbfounded. It seems I have no choice. It's time to seriously face George. George stood there smugly, puffing out his chest and sneering down at me as if I would quickly submit and obey. The time when I complied with George's demands for his mother's sake is over. I had trusted his parents, but now that I know his mother's true nature, I can no longer trust them at all. "If that's the case, then you're fired. Get out of the company." In response to George's angry shout, I smiled coolly and opened up about what was on my mind. "Ha!" George let out a perplexed sound, his face full of confusion. Perhaps he thought it was some strange joke. He quickly composed himself and smirked again. "Fired? What can you do? You're not even my boss. Have you lost your mind?" I sighed quietly and stared at him coldly. The moment he met my gaze, George's body stiffened. His expression was filled with anxiety. I took a deep breath and continued calmly. "You're the one who's mistaken. Not even knowing who the president of your own company is." I showed George the company newsletter. It featured an interview with the president, my photo prominently displayed. After staring at the newsletter, George looked up at me in shock. "You're really the president. This must be a joke, right?" His face paled, and he murmured under his breath as his complexion turned ashen, "Have you finally realized?" George seemed to deflate, collapsing right there. I really didn't know. George was shaking and his voice quivered. "You didn't know? That's impossible. You just chose not to find out." He could have made an effort to know at any time. That newsletter was also available in the company's break rooms and cafeteria. A simple search on his smartphone or computer would have brought up my photo immediately. Even if the company website was deleted, my photo could be easily found. George simply had no interest. His lack of passion for his work had resulted in him being relegated to simple clerical tasks within the company rather than sales. He was only concerned about income, vacations, and benefits. My existence was of no consequence to him. But that was not enough for me. "This isn't the end. We still have to discuss our divorce." George was visibly shaken. "Hey, do you even understand what you're saying?" He must not have thought I would agree to a divorce. "Yes, I can't be the wife you want. So, I'm going to divorce you." I pulled out the divorce papers from my bag. I had been carrying them ever since I made up my mind. "Do you really understand what you're doing?" George looked incredulously between the divorce papers and me. I took out a pen and placed it on the table. "Sign it quickly." George's face went pale, and he froze. Oh, was that divorce me and leave just talk? Coming to his senses, George slammed the divorce papers on the table and hurriedly signed them. Now we are strangers. I stated it calmly. Don't come complaining to me later. Rebelling against your husband, you're a failure as a wife. George snapped back sullenly. Lucky for me to get rid of a woman who prioritizes work over family so quickly. He continued to grumble as if to console himself. Well, that's unfortunate, I responded coolly, unfazed. What will you do after the divorce? Can you imagine how sad my parents will be? Have you ever considered how lonely they will feel without your visits? Lonely, he says. They spoke ill of me behind my back. Anger boiled within me. I was too angry to speak smoothly. I wanted to lash out at George at that moment, but I just gritted my teeth and glared at him. Taking advantage of my silence, George became more aggressive. Poor thing, Mama just messaged me. I'm so hungry I can't eat. What does that even mean? There are stores and supermarkets near their house. Go back to my parents' house. You can still make amends. George directed from a place of superiority. His parents are capable of moving, they don't need care. It's just their indulgence. I've reached my limit. We are strangers now, and I have an important meeting today. I finally managed to squeeze out the words. My anger reached its peak, bringing me back to calm. If it's that important, you should take a day off and take care of it yourself. I will never sacrifice myself for George or his parents. I can't leave my important company for something like this. I've been patient and obedient so far, but I've reached my limit. George seemed surprised that I countered, stepping back. What? Defying me now? Despite being a wife? I've said it many times, but I'm no longer his wife. And George is clearly old-fashioned. He truly believes that a wife should be submissive to her husband. Moreover, he only demands things that are convenient for him. What do you mean by despite being a wife? How great do you think you are? I confronted George without holding back, pressing him for an answer. George clenched his teeth in frustration. She's not my mother. Can't you think of handling it yourself before leaving it to someone else? If he's really concerned about his mother, George should take time off to care for her. His job involves organizing supplies within the company, nothing urgent. He has no crucial appointments with outsiders, and he could easily take a day off if he talked to his boss, yet he tries to push the responsibility onto me. If his mother's condition was truly serious, it would be different. He just wants to control me. Why should I take time off work to do that? Are you that dependent on someone else for your parents' care? George's self-centered logic seems never-ending. Listen carefully. Taking care of Mama and Papa is your responsibility. I'm tired of hearing Mama and Papa. What are you expecting from me? Honestly, I wasn't expecting an answer, but I asked George anyway. George responded with a dismissive snort. You should take over the care of my parents. I couldn't believe George would say something so absurd. How audacious can he be? You should take a day off and go yourself. I'm a stranger now, so I won't be going. I made a rational suggestion to George. George suddenly choked up. He seemed at a loss for words. The problem with his mother should be dealt with by him taking time off, not by dumping it on me. It's utterly inhumane to push the responsibility onto me and complain. You just needed someone, anyone, to take care of your parents, right? George opened and closed his mouth, shaking his head. His face turned pale. That's not true. If I had known you were the president, I wouldn't have asked you to do caregiving. Just moments ago, he was saying despite being a wife, and now he quickly changes his tune. It's clear he just wants to use me for convenience. So now, he's trying to sweet-talk me. But with his next words, George exposed his own contradiction. Well, if there was money, we could hire someone, right? Ultimately, That's the crux of the issue. George relies on others a lot. So you're just going to leave the caregiving to someone else and do nothing but have fun? That's not what I mean, George replied with a smile, countering my statement. If they had managed to manipulate me more skillfully, that might have been a possible future. Thinking about it sends chills down my spine. What if I hadn't known the true nature of George's parents? I might have happily agreed to his proposal. There was also the option of George dedicating himself to caregiving while I supported the household financially. He gave up that opportunity himself. For me, it might have been a fortunate mishap. George looked at me pleadingly, his eyes tearing up. Please, let's not divorce and live together again. We used to get along so well, didn't we? Let's go on dates to various places again. I remembered the various places we had dated. The places you took me were really charming and fun. George's expression brightened. He must have felt a glimmer of hope, but I was foolish to be deceived by that. After we got married, it was hell. I glanced at my watch deliberately. Well then. I have to prepare for a meeting. I'll contact you later about the dismissal. I lightly waved my hand and placed it on the door to leave the meeting room. As I opened the door, George suddenly grabbed my wrist. He looked at me with a gaze filled with anger. The conversation isn't over yet. Fired and divorced? I can't be okay with that. George, tears in his eyes, raised his voice in protest. And what? You're the president. His words mumbled towards the end, and he eventually let go of my hand. Actually, the divorce proposal was from George. It was their fault that I couldn't reveal I was the president. George probably didn't think I would accept the divorce. He must have thought that by threatening divorce, I would comply. And when he found out that I was actually the president, he must have been shocked. This is not how adults should act. George is clenching his teeth in frustration. He seems to regret his lost fortune, but that's not my problem. Your foolishness. At my words, George became enraged and raised his voice. Are you kidding me? Can a major company's president fire an employee just because of a divorce? That's outrageous. George puffed out his chest as if he was making a legitimate argument. His thinking is too immature. My opinions are not understood, and he just seems to be making selfish demands. I'm so tired of dealing with him that I inadvertently covered my face. Seeing this, George grinned, showing his white teeth. Got to the point, didn't I? Let's see what happens if I get serious. You'll be in trouble. I'm just tired. I thought about staying silent, but I pulled a piece of paper from my bag. I read the names written on it. Ms. Johnson from General Affairs, Ms. Stone from Sales, Ms. Baker, and Ms. Ford from Accounting. I said this much and looked at George. Sweat was beading on George's forehead. Shall I read all the other names too? George stepped back toward the wall. The people I just mentioned, they're the women you've been persistently bothering, aren't they? This information was brought to me by my secretary. The HR department received complaints, which my secretary relayed to me. Only my secretary knows that we were married in the company. I couldn't believe it when I heard it. That my husband had been approaching multiple female employees, and quite aggressively at that. Hearing this story made my face burn with embarrassment. I was just trying to get along with fellow employees. This is an unforgivable excuse. George must seriously think he can get away with this. You even invited them to a hotel, but what kind of interaction was that supposed to be? George just opened and closed his mouth, unable to speak. I have messages sent to his smartphone from female employees as evidence. The content is so embarrassing that it makes me blush. At this point, any excuse is meaningless. He deserves proper punishment. I have a duty to protect my employees. It is the president's responsibility to remove those who cause trouble for others. I firmly told George this. George hung his head weakly. To press him further, I pulled an envelope from my bag. This is from the accounting department. They've reported that your receipts might be fraudulently altered." I handed the envelope to George. He reluctantly took it, looking away in silence. He's a do-nothing mama's boy, a womanizer, and moreover, he's stingy. George has been a nuisance not only to me but to many others. The fact that he's terrible is undeniable, but I believed him anyway. I'm disappointed in myself for misjudging people. Anyway, you are fired. You will be held accountable. I didn't stop as I opened the door to the conference room. This time, George didn't try to stop me. He was leaning against the wall, drained of strength. "Well then, I hope you find happiness with your parents at home." George staggered and collapsed on the spot, muttering something, but I left him behind and exited the room. Shortly thereafter, my secretary brought me a formal report. Upon receiving it, I immediately initiated disciplinary dismissal procedures against George. I issued apologies in my name to the female employees who were affected, and through my secretary, I made sure they received proper mental care. I also receive regular updates on George's movements from a private detective agency through my secretary. According to the reports, after becoming unemployed, George returned to live with his parents. He started working again as a part-timer, but an unexpected event occurred. His father received a Care Level 2 certification, and soon after, his mother developed dementia. As a result, George had to take on the caregiving responsibilities for both parents. His mother sometimes wanders at night, and George spends many nights almost sleepless. His days are spent working, and his nights are consumed by caregiving. Please help, I need financial support. George has repeatedly reached out to me. Had our divorce been amicable, I might have considered helping. However, it's undeniable that George and his family treated me like a slave. There is no room for sympathy for such people. I always responded to George in a formal tone. "I'm unable to assist you. Please refrain from further contact. I will take appropriate actions as necessary." After those words, the contact from George stopped. Having gone through the divorce with George, I decided never to marry again and chose to live alone. Though I purchased a new house, I am currently renting it out to others. I believe the property will increase in value over time, so I consider it a good investment. My job is stable, and the company's performance is improving. I see my work as my passion and am even more dedicated to it than before. However, I haven't been able to stop bowling, which George taught me. I participate in bowling tournaments and join community circles at the bowling alley. Most circle members are older than me and have rich life experiences, from which I learn a lot. Recently, a man around my age joined the circle. Unlike George, he is calm, reserved, and taciturn. Yet, the joy he shows when he scores a strike is charming, and I secretly enjoy watching him. Now, I tell myself that work is my life's purpose and live each day to the fullest. Believing that happiness will find me again someday, I hope for that day to come as I continue to work hard. Jordan left the care of our beloved cat, Lucy, to me while I was suffering from morning sickness. After a safe delivery, I was enjoying happy days, but then living together with my in-laws was proposed. Considering the limited time left with my mother-in-law, I agreed to live together, but the daily stress gradually built up. This life with my in-laws slowly started to drive me insane. My name is Rebecca Perez. I met Jordan when I was handling my first major project as a young designer. His company commissioned me to design a new business logo, and we had several meetings about it. The conference room at the large corporation was so refined and spacious that it took my breath away. I was impressed by the clear explanations given by the employees describing the business details. During breaks, their high communication skills and the warm atmosphere were quite evident. In such an environment, I was desperately taking notes while receiving information from a senior, trying to grasp the main points of the work. After the long meeting, I was so relieved that I couldn't help but sigh. Quite a lot of tension for the first day, don't you think? We need to relax more and enjoy the process. My progress was thanks to Senior Nikki choosing me as her assistant. I aim to use this opportunity to design a corporate logo by myself. After the meeting, I didn't go straight home but went to a nearby pub with Nikki. It had been a while since Nikki and I could align our schedules for a meal together. "You're working hard, and at this rate you might find a new boyfriend," Nikki said in a relaxed mode, deepening the conversation about my love life. "Not at all. I haven't had any good encounters," I replied, enjoying a beer after work. Nikki's interest in my love life stems from my history of failed relationships. She is the only person who knows about my past partners, and our relationship is very close. She wishes me happiness but seems to enjoy the episodes of my failed relationships. In the past, I had a boyfriend during high school who reported everything to his mother. He went to another school, so I used to only go on dates with him a few times a month. I have also witnessed him frequently exchanging messages during our dates. When I asked him, "Who are you messaging?" he replied, "I'm telling my mom what we're eating right now." I felt a bit uncomfortable with the situation and thought to myself, it would be troublesome if our dinner turned out to be the same. His comments continued. "My mom chose my outfit today. I've seen this movie with my mom and I promised to eat this chocolate sundae with my mom." It was always about his mom. I was shocked to discover later on that his phone's wallpaper was a picture of his mom. I realized it was impossible for me to surpass his mom, and I ended our relationship. The guy I dated in college used my part-time job earnings at the casino and was dishonest. The person I dated right after getting a job turned out to be married, unexpectedly. I cut off the relationship immediately, but I still feel terrified at the thought of him possibly demanding alimony. Every time I hear it, it's good for a laugh. Nikki laughed, always looking forward to these stories. I've told this story many times, but thanks to Nikki laughing at it, I've come to accept it as a good memory. Just as we were about to move to the next bar, Nikki's phone rang. Her husband was feeling unwell and asked her to come home immediately. It's a pity. I thought we could drink leisurely since tomorrow is a day off. But there's nothing to be done if he's unwell, so go home and take care of him. Although I was quite drunk, I couldn't stop Nikki. She apologized, left money for the drinks on the table, and hurried home. Watching her rush home, I thought, it must be nice to go back to a home where your family is waiting, and I began to feel like getting married. I didn't feel like drinking alone that night, so I decided to go home too. While waiting on the train platform, someone spoke to me from behind. "Good work today," the voice said, and I immediately started thinking about work. There stood a tall man with black hair and glasses. "Good evening, I replied, not recognizing who he was. He continued the conversation. "Thank you for today's meeting. My name is Jordan Perez." At that moment, I remembered that there was someone else with the same last name. I was so focused on the meeting that I hadn't really looked at his face properly. "I apologize. Thank you for today," I said to him, expressing my gratitude, and then fell silent. Thanks to Jordan sharing many interesting stories, waiting for the train felt enjoyable. Jordan is 5 years older than me and lives alone. He doesn't have a girlfriend but showers his cat with a lot of love. I also love cats, and we had a lively conversation about that topic. When the train arrived, we said our goodbyes, and I felt a desire to continue our conversation. That night, as I lay in bed, I hoped to talk to Jordan again. After several work meetings, Jordan and I completed the logo design deal without having time for personal conversations. However, a few days later, I received an email from Jordan through the company mail, surprisingly including his personal number. Despite my hesitation, I couldn't suppress my strong desire to get closer to him, and as soon as I got home, I called him. "I apologize for calling you all of a sudden. I really enjoyed our conversation," I told him. Jordan explained that he had tried to give me his contact information several times before but couldn't find the right moment, and finally mustered the courage to contact me from the address written on my business card. Later, Jordan invited me on a date to a cat cafe, to which I happily agreed. On the day of the date, I was mesmerized by Jordan's casual attire. He was dressed in branded clothes from head to toe, but he wore them in a way that didn't feel off-putting. "Thanks for coming today," he said with a smile, and I realized that I was falling in love with Jordan, feeling my heart race. He had wanted to go to a cat cafe for a long time, but felt awkward going alone. We had a fun time surrounded by adorable cats. On the way home that day, Jordan proposed that we start dating with marriage in mind. I was surprised, but driven by my strong feelings for him and a longing for a relationship, I immediately agreed. He hugged me, filled with joy. I thought getting married wouldn't be bad if our feelings matched, although I hadn't been focusing on marriage-minded dating. As we went on more dates, my feelings for Jordan deepened. My personal fulfillment positively impacted my work, leading to an increase in design responsibilities. I quickly reported my new relationship to Nikki, and she supported me enthusiastically. 6 months after we started dating, Jordan and I officially got married. He was serious about marriage, which brought stability and smoothness to my life. Following his lead, we ultimately decided to tie the knot. After registering our marriage, Jordan, I, and his beloved cat, Lucy, started our life together. The initial period of our marriage was particularly trouble-free, and I felt happy. As time passed and I turned 27, I became pregnant and suffered from severe morning sickness. The stress of commuting increased, so I switched to working from home. This was possible thanks to the supportive environment at my workplace. However, the smell of Lucy's litter became a problem. Before my pregnancy, the cat's litter box odor hadn't bothered me, but it exacerbated my morning sickness. I tried wearing a mask and cleaning it frequently, but these actions only made me feel worse. Eventually, the smell of the cat itself became unbearable, and I could no longer hold her. One night, after returning from a drinking party, Jordan yelled in anger, "What's going on? Lucy's litter box is so dirty." That day, I had been feeling particularly unwell and had been bedridden all day. Despite having informed him of my condition, he had prioritized going out with friends. Therefore, I couldn't understand his anger. "I'm sorry, but I told you I wasn't feeling well, right?" I replied, apologizing yet feeling unjustified. Jordan's anger became more apparent. "What are you talking about? Your condition and not taking care of Lucy are unrelated." While he scolded me, he gently embraced Lucy. I indeed used my poor health as an excuse to not have to clean Lucy's litter box, but I had previously mentioned that her smell was becoming unbearable for me. Despite this, Jordan once again asked me to clean it. Since I was at home, I accepted the request. However, is that really a task I should be doing while feeling unwell? Normally, I wouldn't clean it all day while I was away at work, so this shouldn't be an issue. Thinking about it, I felt a surge of anger at why I should be blamed. I'm protecting our baby right now. I'm feeling sick from morning sickness, so I can't take care of Lucy. You know the smell of Lucy is tough for me, right? If cleaning is needed, why don't you have her stay at your parents' home until my morning sickness subsides? I blurted that out. By the time I realized it, it was too late. Jordan took Lucy and left with a terrifying expression. I immediately tried to apologize, but he responded, "I can't be with someone who doesn't love Lucy. I'll return when I've calmed down." So I've been just waiting for his return. However, weeks passed and Jordan never came back home. But one day, Jordan suddenly returned home alone. It seems that his parents had been taking care of Lucy. After hearing his mother's words, "How long do you intend to stay here?" Jordan showed remorse, apologized to me, and I admitted that I had gone too far, and we reconciled. This was our first major fight as a couple. Afterward, I safely gave birth to our daughter, Charlotte. Months later, Lucy came back home too, and by that time, I no longer noticed the smell. Parenting makes time fly, and Charlotte has already become a fashionable 5-year-old girl. I returned to work from home and was struggling with balancing work and parenting, but I was living a satisfying life. Since resolving the issue with Lucy, Jordan and I haven't had any major fights and have been living cooperatively. Then, suddenly, an event occurred. My mother-in-law fell seriously ill and, with only a short time left, wished to live with us. I have had little to no relationship with my in-laws, only seeing them during the New Year's celebrations, so the proposal to live together left me perplexed. Since Charlotte was born, visits from my in-laws have been sparse, and our relationship has been quite thin. However, for me, that level of distance was appropriate. Therefore, I proposed moving to an apartment near my in-laws' home. Since daily meal preparations are needed, bringing them over is tedious, and a large house has plenty of rooms, so it would expand our living space. Jordan argues that living together is economically advantageous since he would pay the rent and utilities. We, as a couple, are financially independent, with him taking care of the rent and utility bills. We save a fixed amount each month, and the rest is managed freely by each of us. Therefore, cost is not an issue for me. Despite feeling that living with others is difficult, it seems he does not understand my feelings. Charlotte is happy with the spacious house. I agreed to live with my in-laws on the condition that we would end the arrangement when my mother-in-law either recovers or passes away. Thus, we moved to my in-laws' house when our daughter started elementary school. My mother-in-law's illness was severe, and she couldn't stand for long periods, but she was able to manage her bathroom and bathing needs independently, so the need for care was less than expected. My duties remained the same as before, only with increased laundry and cooking, which I did not find difficult. My mother-in-law checks Charlotte's homework when she returns home and seems too well to pass away soon. The problems were with my father-in-law and Jordan. My father-in-law would casually give commands, expecting me to understand and act immediately, which of course was not always possible. Witnessing this, Jordan began to take advantage of me more and more. Situations such as the following started to occur. Considering my mother-in-law's health, I always made lightly seasoned meals. However, my father-in-law seemed dissatisfied with the seasoning. At mealtimes, he would point at the mean and demand salt or pepper. After complying a few times, I could no longer bear it and started leaving condiments on the table from the beginning, urging him to help himself. My father-in-law was satisfied with this arrangement, but Jordan kept requesting, "Make our food more flavorful." I ignored his request. Why should I have to do that? I strongly felt that he should handle it himself. Jordan, possibly because his parents were nearby, acted like a child who hasn't fully grown up. It was unreasonable that he prioritized caring for Lucy over our daughter, Charlotte. When he came home, he paid no attention to Charlotte's homework and was only busy with Lucy. When we went shopping, he would only pick out the brands he wanted or toys for Lucy. While my in-laws still saw Jordan as a child, his childish behavior was gradually diminishing my love for him. What I found most distressing was when my father-in-law interfered with Charlotte's actions. Charlotte, a grade schooler who had started showing interest in makeup, had been buying child-friendly cosmetics. On holidays, she would enjoy applying makeup and doing her nails by herself. Seeing this, my father-in-law would joke, "Is she trying to become a stripper by flaunting her looks at that age?" While he only gave me brief instructions, his constant complaints and sarcasm were particularly infuriating. However, Charlotte retorted, "Grandpa is old-fashioned," which silenced him, and that made me feel relieved. The most uncomfortable moment was when the topic of having a second child came up. "You should consider your age and think about having a second child soon. Shall I give you some advice?" he said, which I found very unpleasant. I am already in my mid-30s and Jordan is approaching 40. We did want a second child, but it was merely a matter of timing. We were satisfied with just Charlotte and did not intend to pursue having another child through fertility treatments. This was a decision for us as a couple and is not something for others to intervene, and the way it was said was extremely displeasing. I had been enduring patiently until my mother-in-law passed away. She herself had apologized several times, saying, "I'm sorry for the trouble caused by my husband and son." She had never opposed her husband in the past and had been unable to speak up. She asked me to be more tolerant of Jordan's behavior since he was spending less time with her. Jordan's behavior was said to be confined to his time at his parents' home, so I couldn't argue against it. Moreover, concerning the matter of having children, my mother-in-law confided in me with a smile. "I've decided I don't want another child with him." Despite the pressure from my father-in-law and Jordan, my bond with my mother-in-law deepened. While I yearned to leave the house, the approaching farewell to my mother-in-law pained my heart. As the first year of living together was about to conclude, my mother-in-law's condition worsened, and she was hospitalized. I continued visiting the hospital, preparing for the inevitable farewell. A month later, she passed away quietly in the hospital, surrounded by family. After the funeral, as we returned to our daily routines, sadness lingered. Although I had planned to leave the house immediately after her death, I continued living there to avoid changing Charlotte's school mid-year. Even a month after my mother-in-law's death, my father-in-law persisted in his authoritarian behavior, and Jordan's attitude had further deteriorated. Even then, he showed no signs of preparing to move out. Instead, he argued that we should stay here forever, claiming it would be pitiful to leave his father alone. I was hoping to move when Charlotte reached 3rd grade, but no effort was being made to find a new home. Furthermore, Jordan began to make unilateral statements about the commute being too long and possibly changing jobs. For me, my father-in-law's circumstances weren't crucial, and with my mother-in-law gone, there was no reason for us to stay in this house. This issue further escalated tensions between us. One night, after Charlotte had gone to bed, my father-in-law and Jordan were drinking and looking through keepsakes. They were quite drunk, reminiscing about my mother-in-law when suddenly a will was discovered. The will mentioned that there was hardly any estate to leave behind, stating it would be sufficient to sell the keepsakes. Most of the content was words of gratitude towards me. Though they did not show me the will, my father-in-law began to complain about its contents. "It's meaningless when someone who couldn't even save money passes away." I was hoping to enjoy the inheritance, he grumbled. She should have included more words of gratitude towards me. My father-in-law said loudly, his voice amplified by the alcohol. Hearing Jordan express his disappointment with, "If there's no money, then there's no point in living together," I was shocked. Was the reason for living together just to target your mother's estate? I asked in a chilly voice, astonished that the discussions about money were not out of concern for his mother as I had thought. Yes, the only benefit of living together was the financial aspect. We lived here without paying rent, being able to freely spend money. We intended to continue this lifestyle, my father-in-law said with a laugh. Unable to contain my anger, I felt my grip tighten. But as the will states, my father-in-law pointed to the will. The will mentioned, despite being busy, you took care of me. Busy? You've just been sitting at home doing nothing. A NEET who doesn't pay anything is just a burden in terms of food costs. Get out of this house, he criticized. I had been working from home for a long time, and I had explained this to my father-in-law repeatedly, but he never understood. Let me say this again, I have been working, and I've been preparing all the meals. Do you really think such accusations are valid? I retorted calmly. While trying to keep my emotions in check, I calmly made my counter-arguments. Provoked by my father-in-law, Jordan also began to hurl accusations at me. Housework isn't that hard, right? You're home all the time. It must be easy for you. We're out there working hard every day. You're just freeloading at my parents' house, he said. Despite his drunken state, Jordan's words were rude beyond comprehension. He deemed the household chores insignificant, yet since moving back home, he hadn't lifted a finger. Without responding, I just retreated to my room. They continued laughing, showing their contempt for me. I resolved to show them exactly what their future would look like without me. The next morning, while the two were still asleep, I took Charlotte and left the house. That night, Jordan called. I could guess what he had seen, but it took him quite a while to notice. "What is this?" he sounded flustered. Unable to contain it any longer, I almost burst out laughing at his words. "What do you mean? Are you calling because you can't understand the bank book? If so, you should ask your father directly," I replied coldly. Before she went to the hospital, my mother-in-law had given me the bank books, entrusted me with managing the household finances, and left behind information on debts that my father-in-law and Jordan had, along with a divorce application. Unbeknownst to many, she had been gradually depleting her savings to cover living expenses, as my father-in-law had accumulated a significant amount of debt, causing us to spend over $5,000 a month on living costs. By the time of her passing, there was hardly any estate left because the savings had already run out. Not wanting to cause any unnecessary worry, I took over the cost of living expenses without informing them. "Why do you have so much money?" I didn't answer his question but continued. "By the way, Jordan, you also had debts." Among the documents my mother-in-law had given me was a promissory note with Jordan's name on it. Although I was surprised, I had somewhat expected this. My mother-in-law had said, "Thank you for enduring patiently for so long. After I'm gone, I want you to live freely, released from the binds of your husband and Jordan. I trusted you, Jordan. I wish you had been honest with me about the debts," I said emotionally. "I'm sorry," he apologized lightly. His casual apology seemed to presume forgiveness, and I pressed him further. "Is there nothing else you need to say?" I was looking for something more than just an apology. After a moment of silence, he finally began to speak. "I've been unfaithful. I'm sorry," Jordan suddenly confessed. He admitted to having inappropriate relationships with multiple people, including a junior at work and business partners. The costs of maintaining multiple relationships had led to his debt, he explained. Thank you for speaking the truth more easily than expected. Now I have all the evidence I need, I said, and Jordan was left speechless. Having suspected Jordan's infidelity but lacking concrete evidence, I had set a trap to test him by secretly recording his statements as proof. You thought I didn't know about the affairs? The divorce is already a foregone conclusion, so please prepare the paperwork quickly. I'll be taking a fair share of the assets, I declared firmly. Jordan was panicking on the phone, but I calmly ended the call. Afterward, through a lawyer, I ensured I received a fair share of the property division, and the divorce was officially finalized. Jordan ended up accumulating even more debt due to the payments required for the property settlement. I obtained sole custody of our daughter Charlotte and completely severed ties with Jordan, choosing not to receive child support from him. Thanks to Jordan confessing details about his infidelity, I even received apologies from his affair partners. A severe conflict erupted between Jordan and his father over financial issues, eventually leading to Jordan being disowned and ousted from the family home. This conflict between the two escalated significantly, to the point where local residents had to call the police due to the disturbance. This series of events facilitated the smooth progression of our divorce proceedings, providing me with some relief. Financially distressed, my father-in-law found it difficult to make ends meet on his pension alone and was forced to look for work to manage his debt repayments. Having always depended on my mother-in-law, he struggled with basic household tasks, realizing just how significant her presence had been. Jordan's own issues were severe. His affair became known at his workplace, resulting in him losing his job. His consideration of changing jobs was likely influenced by this scandal. Previously enjoying a relatively affluent lifestyle at home, Jordan had escalated his affair behaviors, fueled by his preference for expensive brands. Furthermore, one of Jordan's affair partners got engaged to a wealthy man right after breaking up with him. However, once her fiancé learned about her past with Jordan, he called off the engagement and demanded a division of assets, drastically altering her life due to her association with Jordan. Currently, Jordan is unemployed, saddled with significant debt, yet still caring for his beloved cat, Lucy, day by day. His life has temporarily lost its stability, facing many challenges. Treating pets with care is undoubtedly important, but when a cat is considered a priority over me, I begin to question my own worth and find myself caught in complex emotions. Continuing life with my husband might have led to a completely different future, but that choice was not feasible for me. So, with the property division from our divorce as my starting capital, I decided to establish my independence as a designer. After leaving the company I previously worked for, I started a new career at a design studio run by Nikki, the founder. I communicated this significant change to Jordan, but he seemed not to take my words seriously. Since starting work at Nikki's studio, my skills have been recognized, and new job offers have been coming in steadily. This has significantly increased my salary, allowing me to lead an independent life. I am working to further increase my income and aim for an even more stable financial life. If my daughter Charlotte wishes to see Jordan, I am prepared to facilitate that, but currently she is engrossed in fashion and seems to pay little attention to her father's presence. Charlotte lives her life in her own style, unconcerned about others' opinions, and her attitude gives me a lot of courage. As my mother-in-law once told me, I have truly gained my freedom. The past failures with Jordan are now just a laughing matter, which I have overcome with Nikki's support. I intend to continue loving design and living happily with my precious daughter Charlotte.